Labor has been making the case for this particular initiative. But isn't Michael Sukkar right to the extent that he says, the housing minister, I spoke to him earlier in the program, he says the government's already providing hundreds of millions of dollars to states to get this done, and it is a state responsibility. Isn't that right?
Well, Kieran, as Cassandra said right there, and I couldn't agree with her more, we've got a national cabinet now. I understood from Greg Hunt it was supposed to be the greatest reform in our federation. It was meant to get rid of these state and federal divides. We have people still living in caravans as a result of bushfires, Kieran. We have women fleeing domestic violence. We have hundreds of thousands of people who are either waiting for social housing or in rental accommodation they can't afford and that is not fit for purpose. Cassandra's spot on here. It is extraordinary that whilst the government's been spruiking this, supposedly multi-billion-dollar housing renovation rescue package, what we really saw today was not big enough and not targeted well enough to really do the job to provide a home for the people who need it.
When you say, just explore a bit of that criticism, when you say not targeted well enough, obviously we've dealt with the social housing component, but what about the broader issue of means testing? Because the government is quite clear that this is based on other mechanisms that have already been done, like the first home deposit scheme, which they say is fully subscribed.
Well, indeed, they could extend the first home loan deposit scheme to new construction. And with these income limits, it's hard to know really, Kieran, how many people are going to have the capacity to take up what the government has put on offer. I have to say, though, my bigger concern is not so much the income limits here. It is the overall design of the program. That is that we are going to be spending hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars, and we are not going to see the benefit of increasing social housing stock, providing home for mums fleeing domestic violence, veterans who are sleeping in parks, frontline workers who have worked very hard during this crisis and often can't get accommodation close to their work. These are the real heroes. These are the real people we should be concerned about in the community. And when we look at a seat like Eden Monaro, where we have people still living in caravans because their homes burnt down, I would have thought the Commonwealth could have found a more useful way to spend this money.
You've been in that COVID Senate committee today. Apparently the head of the Prime Minister's department has appeared in Phil Gations, and you've been targeting this $60 billion error on the calculations for the JobKeeper initiative. But, if you look at this in terms of the reaction to it, fundamentally, hasn't it been received as a good outcome in the end that the government is going to be not spending $130 billion, but has $70 billion in terms of debt, as opposed to what would have been a lot worse?
Kieran, the more people who are out of work for longer, the more people who lose their job, the more people who are underemployed, the more people have to draw upon their super because they can't get access to government support, the longer and deeper this economic crisis will be. The government are the ones that said they were going to spend $130 billion. They're not doing that. And the government are the ones that said they drew the line at $130 billion and excluded a lot of workers like those million casual employees because the line had to be drawn somewhere. Now we know that there is a $60 billion bungle. This is an accounting error of significant magnitude, the biggest in Australian history, committed by Josh Frydenberg and Scott Morrison. And what do we hear from Phil Gations today in this COVID hearing? He called it a estimates variation. Well, if you can't keep your estimate variations below $60 billion, you can't run a country. And right now, we have Australians who are hurting, Australians who are out of work, Australians who are struggling, and Australians who are very worried come September when JobSeeker and JobKeeper and free childcare and all the other measures the government have put in place are scheduled to snap back. What are those people going to do? How are they going to survive? And quite frankly, the government doesn't have an economic plan beyond September. They need to get moving on one. And we really don't need to hear from the head of the Prime Minister and Cabinet that this is just an estimates variation. This is too serious to get it that wrong.
We've only got a minute left, but I do want to ask you about this other information today in relation to National Cabinet. You've been critical of it as a reform. In fact, you're saying it's not what COAG is. And one of your concerns is on freedom of information, I believe. Can you talk us through that?
Yeah, this is really interesting today, Kieran. The way the government has structured this National Cabinet is as a committee of the federal cabinet. It's a cabinet committee of the federal cabinet. And as a result, it's going to be subject, we heard today in these hearings, to all the FOI exclusion and secrecy provisions, which means that really it's going to be less transparent than COAG. People will have less access to information. And it would seem the federal cabinet could actually override the decisions of National Cabinet because it is a committee of that federal body. So this is an interesting development. I think it's a good question to ask the premiers and the chief ministers. Has it been explained to them that the federal cabinet can override National Cabinet decisions? And did they really sign up to a process where there is going to be less transparency and access to information than there currently is with COAG? You know, this is not how we should be functioning in a democracy. We should be allowing more transparency, more access to the public to information, not creating new bodies that restrict the public's right to know.
Kristina Keneally, thank you very much.